We all float down here, Georgie, and you'll float too. Earlier this month, I finished It by Stephen King for the second time, and it was absolutely amazing. I decided to read this during a heat wave in late June here in Pennsylvania. It was like 90 degrees every single day, and I just don't think that there's anything better than reading a spooky book during a heat wave or during the rain or during the fall or during the winter. Actually, there's just nothing better than reading a spooky book at pretty much any point in any season, but it is especially a very good summer read when you're feeling nostalgic, when you're experiencing heat wave, and that's what I did, and it was absolutely amazing. And I know in my first review I gave it a lot of credit. I am obviously a very large fan of Stephen King. I have a bunch of Stephen King behind me. I have Pennywise behind me. I have Georgie and Pennywise up there. I have the Shining poster over there. Big fan of Stephen King. Go figure. So obviously I would enjoy this book. But on a second read, I found it to be even more compelling than I did the first time. Everything about this book, in my opinion, is like truly next level. It is genuinely one of the best books I've ever read, and I do think it is a masterclass horror novel. It's not just a masterclass horror novel, I think it's one of the most provocative books you can read in general in any genre because it explores its themes and ideas so well over such a huge tome of a novel. And it's just like a genuinely enjoyable read. Now, just getting this out immediately, just because I know people will say something. Yes, I think the sewer scene is gross. Everyone thinks the sewer scene is gross and weird. But besides that, everything else about this book is great. And I do think it's very, very close. And in my opinion, is a 10 out of 10, even counting that scene. So having said that very minor thing, everything else about this book is absolutely spectacular. First of all, the character work here with the Losers Club is really fantastic stuff. Maybe I just wasn't reminiscent enough or nostalgic enough at the point in my life when I read it for the first time, but I do think Stephen King is an author who knows how to make you understand what childhood is like again. As an adult, like as a 26-year-old adult, I sometimes forget what it was like to be like 10 and 11. And that's really not that long ago for me, technically speaking. But like reading this book, I had so many moments where I was like, oh yeah, like I did like stuff like this with my friends. Like obviously I was born in the 21st century. It takes place during the 1950s and 1980s. Huge things change in those years, but like playing with my friends in the creek and goofing around and like making up stories and making up adventures to like keep ourselves entertained was a huge part of my childhood growing up. You know, I grew up out in the sticks in Pennsylvania. You know, I grew up in an area that was not like super populated. The way you entertained yourself was not by going to the mall. It was by playing out in the woods or riding around on your friends' bikes or four-wheeling and stuff like that. So like huge parts of this like book really stuck with me. And I think another thing that really makes this book compelling is its central idea of like what it is to be a child, and also like the fears and hate that you may experience as a child and how that changes your perspective. Because again, like Derry, Maine, very much, and I feel like this is true for a lot of small towns, but it reminds me of the small town I grew up in. Like I experienced a lot of the racism that Mike experiences in this book. Not to obviously as extreme of an extent because this is a horror novel, but like there's so many parts of this book where I was like, yeah, I really relate to that. And it's kind of funny now because I'm transitioning into being an older adult, that like there's things that the adults experience in this where I'm like, man, I get that too though. Like, and it's just like it's such a good novel because I feel like you can read this at any point in your life and relate to part of it. You can relate to the childhood and you can relate to the adulthood. You can see how your decisions as a child have ultimately turned you into the person you are, and how, even though you've left childhood behind, there is still that inner child within you. There is still that imaginative and creative part of yourself that will never die so long as you don't let it. I also just think Pennywise as a concept is just truly interesting, because the idea of like a shape-shifting monster that is feeding on your fear and fuels the hatred in your town is just such an interesting concept. And I just think Derry in general is one of the best settings King has ever created. And I'm both sad and also incredibly glad that this is a place that we do not revisit in most of his works. We revisit it in 11/22/63, and that is it. And it's very briefly, so it's like a footnote in that book. But everything else is outside of Derry. And yet it is one of Stephen King's most iconic places, because there's just something about Derry that I think really kind of hits home about like small town Americana. Like, if you grew up in small town America, I think you can read a part of your experience into Derry, whether it's the good or the bad. There's just something about the small town vibe in this book that Stephen King just absolutely nails. The writing is also spectacular. And despite this being like a 1,200 page book, I think the pacing is actually really good. And I genuinely do not think that this is one of Stephen King's books where I would edit it in any way, to be honest. Like, I really don't think that there's a page in this book that I felt like was too much, where it was like too much information, or like we're sitting in the premise too long. Like, I really feel like the way that he ties this entire narrative together from start to finish is absolutely spectacular. I just love seeing the losers gather together. I love seeing their childhood. I like seeing the way they grow up. I like seeing the way they beat Pennywise. I think that's an interesting concept. I really like the Ritual Chud. And honestly, I think this book does have a very strong finish. I think this ending is very, very well done. I know a lot of people don't like Stephen King endings, and some people don't even like this one, but I think it's really, really well put together. So just like top to bottom, I think it is an absolutely spectacular book. Great characters, great plot, great vibes. Honestly, if you're living on the East Coast right now and you're experiencing this heat wave and you have not read it before, I think now is the perfect time, because so much of this is set in like the hot Maine summer, and you can just like feel that in every chapter and in every page you read. It is an absolutely spectacular novel. The atmosphere is just unrivaled in pretty much any other work I've read outside of Stephen King, and it just shows why this guy's the master of horror, and why I think Pennywise is one of the most like beloved horror creatures of all time, especially in modern media. Is just like that concept of fear, and what do we as people fear, and how do we face it, and how maybe the childhood part of ourselves is actually quintessential to who we are as human beings. It's a brilliant novel. It's a very lovely novel, and I just feel like there's so much that you can take from this and say, wow, that was really spectacular. The themes are great, the pacing's great, the stuff from the small town horror to the way they triumph to the way the kids just play together and have like a great relationship with one another is just it's truly just all around a spectacular novel, and one I will gladly give a 10 out of 10 to, because it's just that good.